As Charles began to wake up, to come out, to change back, he was groggy and disoriented, as was usual for afterwards. He was sweaty and naked. He could feel the hot stickiness of coagulating blood between his fingers and smell the copper scent of it rising from his body. Between his teeth, he still had the flesh of what he'd eaten, raw, stringy, tough bits. He could still taste his prey if he sucked his teeth to get the last of it. He was leaning against a tree, and he could feel the bark scratching his naked flesh, pine needles poking at his legs, and a fly landing upon his face, which was, no doubt, covered in blood. He stuck out his tongue and he licked his lips. Yes, they were still dripping with a scarlet-red substance, and he hungrily licked at them till they were clean. His eyes were still closed, but he knew that it was just at sunrise. He could feel the warmth of the day beginning as he turned his face upwards towards the sky. His heart was still beating quickly as he tried to remember where he'd hidden his backpack the night before. He had learned through the years to always hide some supplies, clothes, band-aids, rubbing alcohol, and water, before the change. He'd inevitably have scratches, sometimes deeper wounds as well, especially on his feet, but he was a doctor, so he could easily take care of them himself when he went to the hospital the following morning. On occasion, he'd even given himself a couple of stitches in his own bathroom. He told his co-workers that he boxed, that he'd been boxing since he was a teen, so they never questioned the bruises or the cuts. They'd just pat him on his back and ask how the other guy looked. He'd mastered this routine by now, but it hadn't always been this way. When Charles was 16 years old, he became a camp counselor at Camp Pine Tree in the mountains of Washington State. Their mascot had been the wolf, and each lodge was named things like the Howler Lodge or the Gray Wolf Lodge, or, for the younger campers, Little Paws Lodge and Cub Lodge. The counselor stayed in Lupin Lodge, where there was a girl's side and a boy's side and a large stone fireplace in between. They shared their meals, and after the campers had gone to sleep, they'd sometimes stay up late playing beer pong, telling ghost stories or gossiping about the worst campers. Kenny Winston, who would swear at them under his breath, or Chuck Shoemaker, who insisted on starting fights, or Carrie Glenn, who cried non-stop all day and night. One night, a group consisting of about 20 counselors decided to head off into the woods to play flashlight tag, leaving behind the most studious and rule-abiding wet blankets to be in charge in case a camper had a bad dream or had wet the bed. They'd already played beer pong for 2 hours, so Charles was feeling pretty good. Adam Cushman was it, so Charles ran off, and a new counselor, Stevie Kendall, whose parents had named her after Stevie Nicks, went with him. She was really pretty, and had caught Charles's eye on the very first day. Her hair was fire engine red. She had freckles that dotted her nose and cheekbones, green eyes, and a smile that lit up her whole face. The two of them ran for quite a distance before they sat down with their backs against a tree, both out of breath. The night sky was so clear way out there, with no lights to block the view. The stars were bright, the moon huge and full, shedding its warm light upon them, making the visibility in the dark woods a bit better than usual. Stevie looked at Charles, and at that moment, the only thing in the world that he could see was her face, and how beautiful she was, as he leaned in for a kiss. But then her mouth twisted, her eyes closed, her neck bent backwards as she writhed mere inches from him, and suddenly she was a beast. She was covered in red fur, her nose was elongated, her eyes sharp and squinty, her ears small, and her teeth shining in the moonlight as she growled at him. He scrambled to stand up, but this thing had him pinned against a tree as it bit him on his arm. He pulled away from its mouth and swung at the thing with his other hand balled up into a fist, and hit the beast between its eyes. As Charles stood up and began to run, he could hear the beast whimpering. Charles caught up with the group, who immediately noticed his bloody arm. They asked him what had happened, and Charles, not knowing how to explain what he'd seen, told them that he'd run into a broken tree branch. Elsa, the nurturer of the group, took him inside the lodge to clean his wound, and as she did, she commented that it looked like a dog bite. He nodded his head but remained silent as she dressed his arm. Charles went straight to his bedroom, and around 5 a.m., he heard his door creak open. He'd been sleeping with a hammer, and he let out a yell and pulled the hammer out from under his pillow. Raising it above his head, he saw Stevie, disheveled and spotting 2 black eyes. He told her to get away. "Get the hell out of here!" But she sat down on his bed. Please put the hammer down. I can't tell you how sorry I am," she began. And then she told him a fantastic yarn about wolves and the full moon, and how she'd been born into this. She was sobbing as she continued, and finally she told Charles that he would now be doomed to live the same life, that she'd tried to resist, she'd tried to stop herself from the change, that she was mercilessly bound to her blood, to act on her instincts, and she begged him to forgive her. He was stunned, confused, angry, and also strangely excited by this story. Over the years, Stevie and her family took him under their care on the nights of the full moon. They taught him about the change. They warned him of the pain in both changing and changing back. They also told him of the magnificence of it all, the smells that he'd never been able to smell before, the crystal clear vision, the hearing that could pick up the flutter of a butterfly's wings 10 yards away. They explained the horrible and the blessings that this curse was, and over time he began to be able to defend for himself, to feel the change coming, to ready himself. He knew where to go and what to do, and he also knew that there were those who hunted creatures such as him, that if he ever let on to who or what he was, that someone could track him down and kill him, shoot him right through his beating heart with a silver bullet. He knew to never tell another soul. He broke up with every woman he ever dated after 2 dates. He rarely had friends. He was cordial to his coworkers, and he distanced himself from his family. As he sat there against a tree with his eyes still closed, he began to feel lonely. He wondered how he could live out his life with no physical or emotional closeness to another human being. He thought that there must be a woman who could accept him for who he is, for what he is, that he must be able to start a family and to be a father. But would his children be beasts? Did it matter? What if they were? He could teach them. He could explain what had been explained to him. He could have his own family, people who loved him and who he loved and adored. The sun was getting brighter, and he knew it was time to clean up and go home. He was smiling at the thought of having a family as he opened his eyes and saw it. The barrel of a gun pointing at his chest. Sean, a custodian at the hospital, was standing in front of him behind the gun. "I knew you was one," he spat out in his disgust. "I could smell your stench. Saw your cuts. Knew you were a good-for-nothing creature of the night." Just as Charles began to open his mouth, there rang out a loud bang. A silver bullet straight through the heart of Charles.